Welcome, everybody, to our panel today. The panel is called Indigenous Activism Now, Talking Story with Clayton Thomas Mueller and Julian Noyes-Cat. And I'm so pleased to have Clay and Julian here with me today. Hey!
Hey.
What's up, Dante?
Good afternoon. Before I introduce you guys, I also want to point out for folks in the audience who aren't familiar with the term, the idea of talking story. If that's something I grew up with. Did you guys grow up with talk story? It's kind of a...
I want to say yes, but maybe you could give a little broadened context.
Oh, it's kind of a pan-native term in the lower 48. Says me from an Alaska perspective. And actually people say it in Alaska too. And I remember being a kid and no matter where I would go in native communities, whether it was South Dakota or Hawaii or Alaska or Seattle or Washington State, you could always just say to someone, oh, let's go sit down and talk story.
Yeah, well then for sure I grew up with that.
Yeah. It must be a lower 48 term. So we're here to talk story about your friendship and your life journeys and the amazing work you do. And I'm going to start by introducing you. So Clayton Thomas Mueller is a member of the Treaty Number 6 based Matthias-Killam Cree Nation, also known as Putagowagan, located in northern Manitoba, Canada. And currently Clay is based out of Winnipeg and is a senior campaigner with 350.org. And Clay is involved in a lot of different initiatives to support the building of an inclusive global movement for energy and climate justice. He serves on the board of Bioneers. He's served on the board for many, many years. And Clay is also very instrumental in formalizing the Indigeneity program and really helping to make the space for the Indigenous Forum that we're in today. So I thank you for that. We all thank you for that. And he's also on the board of the Wildfire Project. Clay's been recognized by the Yes magazine as a climate hero and is featured as one of the 10 international human rights defenders in the National Canadian Museum for Human Rights. He's campaigned across Canada, Alaska, and the lower 48 states, organizing in hundreds of First Nations, Alaska Native, and Native American communities to support Indigenous peoples to defend our territories against the encroachment of the fossil fuel industry, with a special focus on stopping the expansion of the Canadian tar sands and its associated pipelines. So Clay is a campaigner, an award-winning film director, media producer, organizer, facilitator, public speaker, and best-selling author on Indigenous rights and environmental and economic justice. And I definitely want to get into talking about that today. And I met Clay in 2016 when I came to Bioneers, and just looking forward to knowing each other for many more years to come. And the same thing goes for Julian. Julian, I read an article of yours, must have been like 4 or 5 years ago, and I said, I got to get this guy to Bioneers. He's brilliant. So, and then I found out you were in the Bay Area, not far from me, and we've just kind of worked together on different things since then. So Julian is a member of the Canam Lake Band and a descendant of the Lil'wat Nation, also Secwepemc and Stepmiach. I hope I got that right. Widely published 28-year-old Indigenous writer, activist, and policy analyst. Julian has become a highly influential figure in the coverage and analysis of environmental justice and Indigenous issues, as well as of national and global political and economic trends and policies. And you didn't know I was going to say this and embarrass you, but Julian was also named on the Time Next 100 list for 2021. So nice. You deserve that recognition. So with that, we're just going to go right into the discussion. And the first question that I wanted to ask the two of you is how you met and developed a friendship.
Clay, you got to start that
one. It was a number of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I guess not that long if you're old. But I met Julian in Pittsburgh, and we were at this big national conference of BIPOC and Indigenous, organizations, individuals, community leaders. that met to talk about how we're all going to, continue the fight against the oil and gas sector in the United States and in Canada. And it was a really powerful experience meeting him because similar to you, Alexis, I just knew in my heart that like this guy was like something really special. And I'm 44 now, and I've been working for over 20 years in the EJ movement, and it's very rare, and this is not a diss on all our Native men or nothing like that, because I got my own challenges in my life too. But it's not very often that you see somebody so consistent, that is an Indigenous young man in the movement. We have a lot of challenges that we face still with the echoes of colonization and the very personal and intensive process of decolonization and healing. And so when I met Julian, it was pretty wild. And I'm not going to lie to the watchers, like we went out we did some awesome panels and stuff. And, we went out and had a bit of a party, and it was crazy. We were sitting in my hotel room and talking about history. And he was asking me about, well, how did you get into this? And, I started out as a gang intervener. I grew up in gangs. My older brother started the largest Native gang in the country. And, so my first job was running a drug house. And, so I was telling him all these stories about kids that I worked with, and just some of the failures that I had and some of the, first career burnouts that I had gone through. And shit, it was like embarrassing because I started crying. And, and he just sat there and watched me and was like, "Oh, wow. You okay?" And I kind of caught myself, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And he's like, "Well, I guess I better go to bed, eh?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Good talk. And and
that was on the back like this.
yeah. That was the first time we met. I kind of made an effort because I never met this superstar before. And then, just the really deep, authentic conversation that we had, and we were a few drinks in the bag, and he just really touched my heart. And I knew right then and there that I wanted to be an ally to this young man, and I wanted to teach him anything I could, and be his friend. And and ever since then, every time we get together, it's like time hasn't passed, and we start right off where we are. I think everybody has those special people in their lives, and Julian's one of those people for me. And I'm always watching him from afar and continue to be impressed by his amazing intellect and analysis that he brings into the meta discussion, the national discourse in the United States and internationally as well. His writing, has been very profound. And, a lot of people I talk to ask me just randomly, "Hey, do you know this guy, Julian?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's my homie." So, yeah. I don't know what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it pretty similarly. We were at I think it was called the People versus Oil and Gas Summit in Pittsburgh. And this was kind of early on in my, not personal introduction, but in my professional introduction to the kind of weird world of, nonprofits and people who, do this kind of work, the environmental justice work, Indigenous rights and sovereignty work, climate justice work, as what they do, not as it had been for me before when I was a student and a younger person, as something that I was around, but, not what I was dedicating my being, my professional and personal and career, whatever words you want to use for it, to that. And, coming into that kind of a place, I had a white guy who was my boss, who was, he was a nice guy, and he definitely had good intentions and things like that. But I was looking for, people who could be mentors, I guess, or, more kind of a bigger brother kind of a person, someone who I could look to as an elder who'd, been around the block and seen some things. And, then I ran into Clay, and we had this really, I would say that it was like a very emotional and intense, first interaction where Clay showed me, of course, as like men and, as young men, there's like kind of a certain set of expectations around masculinity and, how you are and how you showed up. And, Clay like was very vulnerable with me in our first interaction, which to be completely honest and forthright about where I was in my life, I didn't totally know what to do about that when there's like a, big handsome Cree guy across from you in the hotel room, like sharing his story because you've asked for it. He's like ugly crying in front of you, and I'm like already a fish out of water at this conference, being like, whoa. But I after like sort of leaving that and just the authenticity of it, and also again like the vulnerability of it, was really instructive for me, because I think that it, rather than telling me a way to show up like as a set of instructions, it showed me a way that you could be in these circumstances, with your heart more so than your head, like as someone who's kind of nerdy and interested in things like policy and writing and reading and things like that. Like I'm prone to go towards like the head led things. And, what Clay showed me at a very basic but important level in our first interaction was that like the heart led stuff is really where it's at and where you need to come from. And, then we became homies. We get to hang out now at all these various like movement community gatherings where we run into each other. I mean, obviously there hasn't been as many of those over the last couple of years because of COVID and the pandemic. But, like our, adventures have included, grabbing late night tacos from Clay and my favorite like taco truck in Oakland, and,
Barrett
and shop and shooting. I don't know if we're allowed to do swears on this panel, but like shooting the shit at Bioneers. And, there's parts of that have been related to, the quote unquote work, like the campaigns that we've both been involved in and crossed paths in. When I was at 350, we were both involved with the campaign against the Keystone XL pipeline. And, we've, we've talked about that like on a work side, and then also just on like having a friend and another Native man to talk about life and how things are going with. We really bonded on that wavelength as well, which I really sincerely appreciate. That's a relationship that we've been able to develop. And, even though conferences can be weird, like sitting on a panel and sharing your wisdom or sharing your thoughts or, bearing your heart is a strange experience. And despite that, like, we've actually been able to come together in some of these places and have like real authentic experiences, which I guess is kind of true to how it all started for us, right? At the People vs. Oil Gas Summit in the hotel room where we gave like the awkward hug at the end of a very intense bearing of Clay's heart about some really real stuff.
Yeah, well, for the listeners, like I think there's a couple of really important points, and it comes down to like responsibilities and world and cosmovision, like shared world and cosmovision of Indigenous peoples. Because while we have those things, we're also very different, and we come from different places. We have some shared things, especially like our relationship to the sacredness of Mother Earth and the power in our language and our culture, and the traditional ecological knowledge that exists within our language. There's a lot of things that we're related by. And, there's a thing called kinship, I guess is the best word in the English language to describe like, what Julian was talking about as far as like, this authenticity that's important when it comes to niches, like Native people coming in, like getting to know each other and and then just figuring out, if we're down for the struggle and if we're going to support each other. And, that's a really important thing, I think, to all Native people, is that kinship, and authenticity and realness. Because I think that like a lot of us are still like growing and learning, and like we're on healing journeys. It's a lifelong thing. And a lot of us carry a lot of trauma, there's a lot of shared experience when it comes to the violence of colonialism and trying to work as a professional. I come from a different generation than Julian has, and, he's already surpassed me in so many ways. And, whatever young men and women and everyone in between that he encounters when he gets to be my age will probably have surpassed him at an even younger age. And that's, I think, how this process of decolonization, has been working. And yeah, I get a lot out of the relationship with this guy, because he's one of those people that wants that, just by existing and doing what he does in the world, it makes me want to like try even harder, and learn even more. And yeah, and then also, continue to share that with other young people that are coming into the movement. I think at 44, one of the things that I've realized is that I'm not necessarily going to be out there on the front line anymore, like hammering. I mean, I might get arrested a few more times yet in my life, but there's all these incredible young leaders that are coming into the movement. And, at my age, the mentors I've had, I had a lot of falling outs with a lot of them when I got to the point where I surpassed, my need for them to mentor me, and where I needed them to just be my friend. And so one of the things I've really tried to incorporate into I don't want to use the word leadership, but in the way that I show up in the movement, is that when I meet young people, I try to be as real as possible with them, because one of the things I experienced growing up with a lot of the Native, especially male mentors that I've had, I put them on these pedestals, and I was like, oh, they're like, basically red Jesus. And then when their humanity showed up, it was very devastating. I was like, oh my God, this person's a human being and they're not Superman. And so one of the things I always try to be real about with young people I meet is just let them know exactly who I am, where I'm coming from, and the healing journey that I'm on. But yet, the importance though of showing up, because 90% of this work in the environmental justice movement is just showing up, believing in spirit, and not trying to be that lone like gunslinger, that lone warrior, but really coming together with your network and, starting with ceremony and, and then really deep planning and then implementation and, and working as the collective, because at the end of the day, that's what we're fighting to protect, is our collective rights to sovereignty and self-determination. And, so it's a balance, it's a thing.
Oh, thank you for that. What was bubbling up for me hearing this story is when I go to one of these events and I meet someone maybe from another region that's involved with similar work as me. I don't know if you guys do this, but I always like text my friends who know them, and I'm like, are they really cool? Or is there something I should watch out for? Y'all do that, right? That's the behind the scenes of the Native activism scene. And I want to take a moment to do some housekeeping, which is for the people who are listening into this panel today. There is a chat, and if questions come up for you, any kind of question, just put them in the chat, and we have somebody who's monitoring it, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. And I have a question that kind of popped up for me that I thought I'm curious about, and I think that the folks listening in today would like to know. So you are referred to as Indigenous activists, which is kind of a blanket term, and it's got a lot of connotations involved with it. And I know, like at Standing Rock, that popularized the term water protector. But I want to know what you think of the term when you're labeled Indigenous activist. How do you feel about that? And is there another term we should be looking at? Is there a way that we should reframe that label?
You want to go first this time, Julian? Or?
Yeah, I can go first. Well, first, I just want to say that, like, it's really cool to hear Clay processing some of these things because, a lot of, I guess, what's interesting about being like an activist or just, being someone who gets invited to speak on panels is that like a lot of the time people expect you to say things. And what I find is that the more important end of communication and learning, and then actually eventually being able to share, is the listening piece, right? And so it's really cool for me, even in this context where I'm supposed to talk, also to like hear Clay's perspective on these things, because he's been doing this so much longer than I have, and learn from people who've been doing it longer than him, and on and back and back. On the activist thing, I think it's such a strange, I have a weird relationship to it, because obviously I get introduced or described as an activist in various things, and certainly part of what I do is advocate or activisty, and I come to all the work that I do from the perspective of trying to build power for my people and my communities, and seeing myself as part of a long line of Indigenous peoples, fighting for our sovereignty, fighting for our rights, our land, essentially. And then also as a part of a broader movement of people fighting for, their fair share, for their due, for what some people describe as social justice. And that was certainly something that second piece was something that I was definitely raised with, growing up in a place like Oakland in the Bay Area, where there's just such a rich history of those kinds of movements. And so on the one hand, like, I'm very proud to be part of that tradition of activism. And then on the other hand, there's a way in which sometimes when you're like, to me, it seems like almost every Indian who shows up is called an activist, because any Native person who shows up, right, is going to say like our piece about the fact that our land has been taken, our rights have been trampled upon, that we are sovereign and yet we are not treated as such, et cetera, right? Like those are just the truths. And yet when you tell the truth, in most contexts, it comes across as, oh, this guy, has a megaphone in his hand and, has people marching behind him and is engaged in, an act of protest, or, speaking truth to power, or any of those sorts of frameworks in which that kind of thing is shared. And most of the time, I don't think that if it weren't for my sort of Indigenous identity, my racial identity, the way that I present, like, I don't think that most people would call me an activist, as someone who works on policy, as someone who does journalism, as someone who writes. But there's a particular way in which Native people specifically, and I think people of color sometimes more generally, are sort of typecast in that kind of way. And I mostly see it as a empowering thing. Again, like, I think that is what I set out to do as a young person, being part of that tradition of fighting for our rights, for our what we're owed. And then there's another way in which sometimes I feel weird about it, because, like, I wonder if someone who is doing the same things, writing, reporting, engaging in questions of policy, et cetera, like, would be called that if they were not my identity or my race. But again, like, that's also part of being who we are, right? Like, people have certain expectations, have certain biases, both mostly bad in our case, but like sometimes, mixed when we show up. And, I think that there's what I've seen with folks who are really effective at this, like Clay, is like, they're able to jujitsu that positioning into, leverage, or positions where, they can use their standing as someone who is an activist or who's engaging in that tradition to actually win campaigns and get, greater good for people. But personally, I'll just say that I have I guess my narration just revealed that I have a complicated relationship to people applying that term to the things I do.
Yeah, I think like Alexis and Julian, like both of you, like conveyed like there. I think there's a big like jujitsu match going on, like just even in Indian country, about the term activist, land defender, water protector, climate defender. You know, where like I think for the listeners that are watching right now, like, you know, Native people are not a monolith, right? Like we're not a page in a history book. Like we have like super fucking evil, like capitalist people in our nations, that are working with colonizers to like perpetuate business as usual. And you know, and a lot of, I think the difference between them and like say like white people in the United States context or the Canadian context that are in that kind of position of power and that are really bought into extractivism, mega extractivism, is that, you know, they're doing it out of desperation and out of being blackmailed, and probably like at the core of their hearts they're concerned about their families and about their extended nation, you know, and the extreme cash poverty that they're facing and going through, and all the socioeconomic like critical points that creates. You know, so there's a bit of a difference, and it's the same with, I think, you know, like activists, like we're, you know, like I think indigenous peoples who have become activated on, you know, defending their land, water, and climate, you know, from a native rights perspective. There's a wide spectrum there. You know, I think I probably get more criticism from my own people about the role I play in the movement than I do from straight up like, you know, oil and gas like executives and stuff, you know. And you know, and that's just the reality. I think that's just part of the contemporary indigenous experience right now, where we're fighting. You know, we're dealing with a lot of layers, I guess is what I would say. And you know, for me, I really don't get picky about the terms. You know, I'm not really concerned about that stuff. I do my best to be very conscious, though, about the very diverse and multi-layered conversation about the identity of a land defender within the indigenous context. And I'm being very conscious about that as I travel through this experience of life and the roles and responsibilities that I've been given by my ancestors. And, you know, I think like one of the things that's important to understand, you know, at least from my perspective, like 44 years of age, is that quite often after big battles, you know, and this has happened dozens and dozens of times, I'll look across the battlefield and it'll be the same individuals that are there. And there's a consistency of these individuals and how they show up. Some of them are old, some of them are young, some of them are two-spirited, some of them are men, and some of them are women, mostly women, I would say. But there's always like the same consistent warriors that are left in the battlefield. And we're like, whoa, that was intense. What next? You know, and then we come back together again, and, you know, we do training and bring new people in and, you know, expand our political base of resistance, and we do it again, you know, mass escalation, you know, and then preparation, you know, and then mass escalation, like, you know, and what that process has led to, especially like, you know, like in building it around, you know, spirit and accountability, not just to our ancestors and future generations, but also to other relatives that live in the biosphere that we're trying to protect, you know, the ecosystem that we're a part of, is that, you know, we've been able to win some pretty significant victories, like badass victories. And I think that, you know, there's a thing that's happening right now that is different than when I was young. The amount of uptake of young people that are becoming activated has expanded greatly, and not just young people, but like grandmas and aunties and, you know, uncles and grandpas. And there's something big and very special happening right now that's different than when I started, you know. And you know, when I started organizing, you know, I was organizing here in Winnipeg. We had a gang epidemic happening in the 90s, and a lot of kids were ending up incarcerated or dead. And you know, and you know, and I had the gift of not ending up that way, you know, because my mother's son, or sorry, my son's mother, and my big brother, you know, both encouraged me to get an education and to try and turn things around. And so, that education that I went out and found was not like university and all that. It was Sundance, and it was like Sweat Lodge, and I received my pipe going to Sundance, and started to like be exposed to culture and natives that, weren't always drunk, and, and it really changed me. And it helped me, I think through the hard times where I was able to show up and have some hard conversations with a lot of people in our community that were going through some hard times. Of course, I could only do that for 2 years, and I burnt out. And then I ended up going to California, had a job opportunity there. And, that led to the environmental justice movement and the role that I play in it. But that's another conversation, I guess.
Well, I think what is something that I want. So I'm not the one who said this. Many other people have said it, but a lot of people say that just by being born Indigenous, that's a political act. So when I think about the term activism, I have a couple of thoughts about it. One, in that I feel like if you are somebody in this society that benefits from white supremacism, and if the status quo stayed the same, and you'd probably be okay, like if the extraction industries weren't literally destroying your homelands, then you can make a choice if you care about it and you choose to be an activist. But I feel like we almost don't have a choice. And like you said, Julian, I don't think there's anything wrong with the term at all. And in some cases, we carry it like a badge of honor. But at the same point in time, it's important to distinguish the positionality in relation to settler colonialism, intergenerational trauma, and what our communities are still facing in this very, very unequal society that we live in. And then, so sometimes I think, and then the other thought I had about it is that I feel like the term activism has the similar kind of connotations as the term environmentalist. If you're labeled an environmentalist, all of a sudden there's a huge swath of people that you can't connect to, that you want to connect to, because in order to make sweeping change at a societal level, we need to do it at all levels and be able to relate to all different kinds of people. I know there are people out there who vote differently than me, but we still care about the environment in very similar ways. But as soon as I'm labeled an environmentalist, the conversation is over. So I think it's really important to think about some of these terms. And and also you were talking a little bit about some of the strategies and ways that you have been an activist. And that cues me up to the next question. And I'm going to mash it up with an audience question that I have here, because this audience member's question was almost very similar to mine. So the question is, what forms has your activism taken? And the person in the audience says, what strategies other than occupation and demonstration do we need in order to stop the expansion of pipelines? So it's kind of a mashup. What are the forms activism can take? Which ones do you take? How are they effective? What can we do?
Yeah. I'll have a go if you don't mind, Julian. And then
Yeah, you should go first on that one, I think.
Cool. Well, I guess I would answer this question in two parts. Like, one is that, there are relatives on the front line, like Wet'suwet'en, and the traditional houses, of the Wet'suwet'en whose lands are being impacted by the Coastal GasLink project. There are all kinds of people in Julian's, motherland, Secwepemc Nation, including Tiny House Warriors in the Blue River watershed, and the Tsleil-Waututh, in the Lower Mainland, right there in the Port of Vancouver, and like 24 nations in between those territories that are being impacted by the Canadian-owned Trans Mountain Pipeline proposal, of which construction is happening right now, and and there's a lot of other places where that just energy infrastructure is being proposed, and they're trying to build it on Indigenous lands. And I think one of the things that we've realized over 15 years of pipeline wars, because we've been engaged on this for a long time, was that there was that we've been stuck in a very significant kind of game of whack-a-mole. And there's just a continuation. And if we look at the outcome of COP26, the big climate summit in Glasgow that just ended, governments like jade economies are doubling down on fossil fuels, even with the climate emergency. And so we can expect more fossil fuel projects that are like big infrastructure projects on the table. And, my team at 350 that I'm a part of, we've decided to like put our focus on a much more broader, hammering of the Canadian government and other big economies like the United States, to push for instead, massive government intervention into the climate emergency. Some people have called that historically the Green New Deal. Some are calling it the Just Transition. Here in Canada, we're running a campaign called the Just Transition Act campaign. We're calling on Prime Minister Trudeau and his government, to implement the Just Transition Act they promised over 2 years ago, which would help this economy transition off of fossil fuel, and especially put those workers and those communities, i.e. First Nations communities in the tar sands, that would be most affected by this, turning off the tap and switching over to renewables, that they are first in line for retraining, retooling, and the climate mitigation and adaptation funds put in place to make sure that they come out of this big transition in the best way possible. But it also calls for the creation of millions of jobs that leaves no worker behind, that gives everybody, a union job that needs one, and that helps those fossil fuel workers especially retool and recertify to get good local jobs, in the new economy. But, bottom line, our emphasis now has become very much a balance between supporting those frontline communities, especially Indigenous communities that, are fighting these companies right now, the proposals that exist right now in their territory, that making sure they got the resources and amplifying their message and making those the core of the broader ask for massive economic transformation. And it's a pretty challenging task, because there's urgency everywhere and the need for resourcing and amplification everywhere. But the goal, I think, is to build the world's largest social movement in the history of humankind ever, to, use that people power to change these freaking governments who are stuck in the back pocket of big oil, to do what they freaking need to do. And they're not doing it right now. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Clay said. I mean, firstly, I just want to say that in my view, the bravest and one of the most important things that can be done, and I'm not a leader in this space, but I'm obviously a supporter, is of people, putting their bodies and themselves in the path of, these projects and these pipelines, and asserting our rightful claim to those lands over these corporations' claims and these governments' claims. In addition to those, the avenues that I have worked in are primarily, I would say, trying to get more Indigenous peoples into positions of power within, the government and things like that. Policy, which Clay also touched on, and then communication. And the challenge, I think, with all of those, and the first strategy, which is just the literally, saying enough is enough and this is ours, is that there's no, it seems to me that there's no foolproof way to, take on the biggest, most powerful industry in the history of humanity, which is the fossil fuel industry. It's a very tough campaign kind of task to be, confronted with. And so what I would say is that none of the approaches are going to win 100% of the time, but, in combination or, together or used in the right way, I think that they can make some differences. So, when I was working more directly and in the day-to-day of politics, progressive politics in the United States, I had the incredible honor and privilege to, through my writing and policy advocacy and work, advocate for Deb Haaland of the Laguna Pueblo to become the first Native American cabinet secretary and the Secretary of the Interior of the United States. It's like probably the coolest thing I've gotten to do in the world of politics. And I will also say that it has not been a perfect solution to all these challenges. You know, the Department of the Interior is still issuing a large number of leases for oil and gas to drill on public lands. You know, that was something that we were hoping would end under the Biden administration, but that's something that's still ongoing. You know, similarly, the Line 3 pipeline in Ojibwe, Anishinaabe territory in what is now Minnesota, you know, has been built, right? And that was something that we were also hoping, you know, that Indigenous leadership in a number of different positions within the federal government might help at preventing, and that was, you know, not the case. So on the one hand, while I still truly believe that, you know, having Indigenous peoples in these positions of policymaking, like Secretary Holland is a historic and significant step forward for Indigenous peoples collectively, you know, that does not mean that in every circumstance, you know, the decisions are going to be made in the way that I believe is the right way, and that a lot of other Native people believe is the right way. And that's a really hard thing, I think, to still to this day for me to sit with, the reality that even when we get our own people, you know, Secretary Holland literally went to the camps in the path of the Dakota Access Pipeline and cooked green chili stew and tortillas for the water protectors. Like she believes in this stuff. You know, there are still structures and political realities and economic powers that, you know, stand in the way of the kind of change that we want to see. You know, the other things are, you know, just building on what Clay said. Obviously, having our own sorts of visions, which include policy visions for the world that we want to see, and working with lawmakers who can be our allies on some of these issues to develop legislation. You know, that's obviously something that can be impactful and necessary. And it's something that I got to do when I was the vice president of policy and strategy at a think tank called Data for Progress. And, you know, in small ways around the edges, what we did there and what a number of other progressive and left-leaning sort of environmental actors did is influence the set of bills that are now moving through the Congress, which are, you know, not enough, but would be a step in the right direction in my view. And then lastly, you know, in my role as a writer and a communicator about these things, you know, I obviously try to lend my voice to the broader sort of movement and you know, be amplifying the messages and where appropriate to be, you know, sort of giving my own analysis and my own perspective on these issues in ways that I hope, you know, might influence the way that people think about them and approach them, and maybe even the way that policymakers and decision makers act on these sets of issues. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that it's really tough to try to make change. Like when you go out and, you know, are like, I think that this is the way that this thing should happen in the world, and you go say that and you work towards that, it's really hard to make that actually happen, right? Like you might dedicate months and like all of your time and lose sleep over doing that kind of thing, and you still might lose. You know, there are moments where we were pushing for Secretary Holland to be nominated by President Biden, and it looked like it wasn't going to happen. I was just like, this just seems so obviously to be the right thing to do. How are they going to get this wrong? You know, it was a very kind of desperate moment. And yet, you know, we still, I think, if we're going to be good ancestors, if we're going to be part of that proud tradition of, you know, fighting for our land, our rights, our sovereignty, you know, we still have to do that work. Like it's still important, even though there's the potential that we're not going to win all the things we're fighting for. I think that there is an imperative to fight in the first place.
Well, thank you for those very thoughtful responses. And for myself, I tend to think of activism and creating social change through social movements really as a continuum. And on one end are those people that Julian called out, the bravest ones, who go out there in the front lines, go get arrested, lay down their bodies in front of logging trucks. And we already heard yesterday in this conference, it's still rampant that indigenous activists in the Amazon and in Mexico and other places like that are still being violently murdered on a continual basis. They probably want to do that in the North American continent, but they can't get away with it. So they have to put up with us. But on this continuum, to one end is that laying down your bodies and really risking your life. But at the other end are things like donating money, signing petitions, writing your lawmaker. And I remember about 15 years ago when social media was a little bit younger, people used to really criticize that and they called it slacktivism. But I feel like there are many different roles. It's very complex making social change, and that all the roles are needed. And like you said, Julian, as well, to make sure that we're also have people on the inside making policy change. Sometimes they're hamstringed, but they do actually make some positive change. So I just wanted to point out this activism, and and the fight against fossil fuels is probably the biggest one of our lives, right? But social change can happen, and sometimes people forget that it can take like 50 years. So, a really good example of this is that people used to think that cigarettes are good for you, and the tobacco companies lobbied with the government, and they're still doing it. But there was a really successful campaign, and we actually had the information, the medical information of the harm that cigarettes cause 50 years ago, but the tobacco companies stopped us from understanding it. But there's been a continual campaign for the past 30 years or so that promotes tobacco as a defective product, which actually changed the public mind, and it has resulted in a lot more regulation of that industry. So we have talked about many different ways that we can be activists, and I would like to specifically dial in on both of your creativity and talents as documentary filmmakers, as writers, as brilliant thinkers. I know you both have some recent projects in the works, and I'd really like to hear about what you have going on, and give our audience a peek into other ways that they can learn and follow up with you, and what to keep an eye out on.
You should all buy Clay's book. That's my take. Anyways, Clay, you should go.
Do you want to go first? No? You want to go first?
You're the one who actually has like a thing that people can.
I think you should talk about your thing though, and then I can talk about mine.
What's that?
You can talk. I think you should talk about your thing though, and then I can talk about like.
Okay, yeah, I can go first. So this is all something that everybody who's listening should remember, like a year or a year and a half, maybe 2 from now, because it's going to be that long before my book sees the racks at Barnes and Noble or whatever. But I'm working on my first book for Alfred A. Knopf. It's called We Survived the Night. It's a book about indigenous peoples in the United States and Canada that braids together reporting on indigenous peoples and communities with elements of personal and family narrative and history. Working on it right now. It's due at the beginning of 2023, so in a little while, and then it usually takes about a year from then to get the book out into the world. But it's been a project that has been already multiple years in the making for me. I have been thinking about it since I was just a couple years into doing journalism and public writing. And it's also, the most challenging creative endeavor that I've ever tried to set out into. And just talking about it actually gives me a significant amount of anxiety, because I don't really know how to write a book. And the other thing I'm working on, which I'll just mention briefly, is I'm co-directing a documentary, which is something I even know less about than writing a book. I'm not really being a good salesman for my projects here. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Anyways, and that documentary is about the search for I'm a co-director on it, so I'm working with another filmmaker, and it's about the search for unmarked graves at the residential school that my family was sent to in Williams Lake, British Columbia, and it's a very heavy topic that I've been on
You
the
were
ground.
just up there, right, Julian?
Yeah, I was just up there a couple weeks ago, and I'm going back in a couple weeks, and actually relocating myself to the Northwest so that I'll be closer to home and closer to the things I'm working on. So yeah, look out for both of those things. They're going to be out in a couple years, and I'll maybe be teasing them or talking about them in my writing, my talks, my social media, etc. over the next year or two. But Clay's stuff is actually really good and actually already out, so he should tell you about that.
Well, two things. I think this is really good because like a lot of people think, including myself, are like, oh, I'm gonna write a book and it's just gonna be a thing and it'll be out in a year. But no, it took me 7 years to get my book out there.
That's better than me. It took me 10.
Yeah. So
for each book. Nice.
And I think it speeds up after the first one, but I started writing Life in the City of Dirty Water, and originally it wasn't even a book; it was just like journaling, because I'm a big practitioner of therapy, especially given the work that I'm involved in with the climate movement and all that. I think a lot of us have like severe climate anxiety and stuff, especially those of us that get access to all the hardcore science. And then, just being native on top of that and dealing with like, settler colonialism gives you a lot of anxiety. And I was finding myself having a really hard time, like doing the day-to-day basic things that a dad should do with their sons. And I found myself going into autopilot when my boys were like 4 and 6. And, so just simple things like playing or, being present at dinner, doing homework. And so I talked to my therapist about it. I was like, I don't know what's going on. And he's like, this is a super normal thing for like, survivors of Indian residential school or for children of survivors of Indian residential school. Part of Indian residential school syndrome, or what Western science calls PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is this thing called dissociative behavior, where you go into autopilot and you're just not there. And it's a defense mechanism to protect yourself. And what he said is like when you have kids in that kind of mental state, and every age that you witness your children at, it brings back the memories of the traumas that you went through at that particular age, and so it can click your fight or flight response, and you can go into autopilot. And I said, well, shoot, what do I do to deal with it? And he's like, well, you should start writing about it, And he's like, still keep going to ceremonies and, come see me and, eat healthy and maybe lose a bit of weight and, stop smoking and drinking, so much and all that. And I was like, okay. So I wrote a book, but it was way too fucked up to publish. It would have traumatized a bunch of people that I love and that I'm still going through the journey with. So I talked to a videographer friend of mine that I work in the movement with because we're filmmakers and we do movement films and stuff. And I was like, yo, man, we're doing some shit out in the field. Can you record me, tell stories about being Native growing up in Winnipeg? What it's like to be an Indigenous person growing up in an urban center in one of the inner cities of these lands that they call Canada. And he's like, oh, yeah, man, that sounds amazing. So the project, grew into a much bigger thing because, we recorded about, 300 hours of storytelling footage and stuff. And then we put that audio from that into the Google voice to text system on Google Tools. And it spit out a manuscript that we then edited into my book, Life in the City of Dirty Water. But we also produced a 20-minute short documentary that, it's an award-winning documentary. It premiered at Hot Docs in Toronto, the biggest documentary film festival in the world. And then, once COVID opens up and we're able to travel, I've got a whole like multimedia, transmedia, 3-dimensional storytelling universe of Life in the City of Dirty Water that we'll be launching that has podcasts and vignettes, like 3 to 5 minute videos of content that's not in the book or the film, of me telling stories about what it's like to be Native living in the inner city and trying to do all the things that, we got to do to try and turn things around. And so, you can get the book on literally any platform that sells books. I always encourage people to order the book if you want to from your locally owned bookstore instead of the big, Amazon or whatever. But you can watch the film, online on YouTube for those of you in the United States, and you can watch it right on CBC Gem streaming platform, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation here in Canada. It lives on their platform now. And as far as upcoming projects, I'm going to be starting my own my first feature-length film in early 2022. It's about the epidemic of children, who were born here in Manitoba, half Native and half German, when there was a big German training facility at the Canadian FB Shiloh base outside of Brandon, Manitoba, near Winnipeg. My younger brother and sister's father is German. And but there's 50,000 kids who were born whose dads just booked it back to Germany after training at that base that are half Native, half German, and don't know their fathers. It's still untitled, but I'm really excited about that story. I think it's going to help a lot of people heal and open up a lot of good conversations. And then on the campaign side at 350, I'm working on a campaign, to pull together a new social movement vehicle called the First Nations Climate Emergency Declaration Initiative, where we're lifting up, Indigenous nations that are, already engaged in the renewable energy revolution and that are declaring their own climate emergencies as part of their assertion of title and sovereignty, and demanding a seat at the table of Canada's climate mitigation and adaptation program.
I just think it's so cool that one of the things that I've learned partially from Clay, but also just from traveling and visiting with people and listening, is that if you had talked to me even just a couple of years ago about writing a book or making a movie, I wouldn't know the first place to start on either of those things. And it just feels so big and intimidating and crazy and, something that's out of reach. And how do you even do that? And what I think is so cool about Clay and about a lot of Native people who I meet more generally is the basis for all this stuff is just talking and listening, right? It's about sharing your story. My understanding, Clay, of how you got started on your book was you would literally speak into as you said, a Google voice recorder, right? And that was the basis of your writing, was just essentially oral storytelling, what maybe an anthropologist might call an oral history of the life in the city of Dirty Water, right? And I just think that that at the most basic level, especially as I've gone more and more into the trauma and really the silence in my own family and community about the residential school, it's not something that my grandmother talks about. It's not something that my dad really talked about much. And just the ability to be able to actually talk about, the things we've seen, experienced, gone through, to share that and to get in that practice. There's something really essential and fundamental and also empowering about that. And yeah, I mean, just what's so cool to me about you and your practice in that domain is that it comes from, you're just a really good talker. You're really good at I when we hang out, I just love sitting there and listening to you tell all these stories, some of which are wonderful, some of which are awful, some of which are just straight up crazy. And that's, that's what it is, right? That's the basis of writing a book, making a movie, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. I'd encourage young people and all people to just do that. That is a thing that we can all do. And it's important.
Well, we're going to queue up the trailer to the documentary, but since we are in the middle of a love fest, I want to tell the two of you what I love about you. And that is that I love your ability to have no fucks in a good way, where we say those things and we tell those stories that other people, maybe our parents' generation, wouldn't say or are scared to say. And the no fucks in the sense of like, you're going to speak your truth and not care about somebody coming from over here blasting you for what you had to say. Or even especially as a person of color who's making your way in the mainstream, you know, you're going to say things and you're going to be blacklisted from everything, but you have to have no fucks and just say it, because you will find more friends and allies along the way. But I'm sure there are just like jobs and things that all three of us couldn't get because of things we've said or done in the past that are truthful things that needed to be said and done. So I really love that about both of you. And, you know, I do want to acknowledge that this sharing requires a lot of emotional labor. It's re-triggering every time we talk about these things. So doing this work, Julian, with residential schools, Clay, with the gangs and how you grew up, also residential schools, you know, I have done the same work myself. And I have a middle school age story about that in my head based on my grandmother that I would like to publish. And I've done the research, and apparently what really happened when I got into the archives was quite different than what little we were told. So, you know, it's really true. So I just want to thank you for that. And also mention that we have a webisode series that's featuring Julian as a co-host that is currently in the process of being licensed to PBS. And when we were filming that, I just really looked up to and admired you, Julian, because you just got up there with that script and like delivered it in a way I never could have. So, and I feel that way about both of you.
The funniest part about that is that isn't it now playing in like IHS like waiting rooms or something?
Oh, we want it to be. We're still working on the license.
I think that's the funniest and simultaneously coolest thing ever. That like people are gonna walk into the IHS clinic and like,
I do too.
You know, we're gonna be like explaining these
for the viewers. That's the Indian Health Services. So like, you know, the Department of like the Bureau of Indian Affairs Health Services. They have Indian specific hospitals on reserves in the United States. So that's what he means.
Yeah. But I am going to be talking to some people at PBS in a couple of weeks here. So I don't want to shortchange our audience and their questions. So if you haven't listed your questions yet, we probably have time for about 2, or unless we do super quick answers, because they will cut us out at the top of the hour. But I do want to show that trailer. So our tech team in the background, can we drop the trailer to the documentary about the city of Durham?
You know, Winnipeg's got the biggest urban population of Native people in any city in Canada. It's the biggest urban reserve, as they call it. The city of dirty water. You know, I love this place though. And I love all the people here, even the people that done me wrong. I've been going in and out of therapy since I was in kindergarten. She grabs me by my braids and she bashes my head against the wall. Go outside and wash the blood off my brother's car. I walked into the bedroom when he's beating her on the bed and I went, "Hey Daddy, look what I made. It's an airplane so I can fly away from here." And then I went, "Woo."
This year's keynote speaker is a courageous, passionate, social justice activist, Clayton Thomas Mueller.
No matter where you go across this country, Indigenous peoples are on the front line of resisting the most destructive industries. So all of the pipelines, all of the oil and gas operations are directly adjacent to Indigenous communities.
We got to teach humanity how to fill that void inside of us, how to connect to the sacredness of the place of where they're at, how to connect with living systems and being a part of that system, understanding your role in that system of life.
Sometimes it hurts to be indigenous, born in this nation. Not enough to talk about decolonization. In the battles with myself, I'm continually facing. Feel the stress of the world on my shoulders, I'm fading.
Thank you for that. Oh, I want to go see it again. So we have just about 10 minutes and we have 2 questions. So the first question, I know there's somebody who asked a long time ago about how to be a good ally, but we've got a lot of resources on that through Bioneers that will be coming out soon. So I'm going to skip to the next question I saw on the list, which is, how do you see storytelling as a tool, practice, and or process to use in the face of the climate crisis?
You want to go first, Julian, or do you want me to go first?
Do you want me? Should I go? Do you want to go? You should go.
Okay. Well, it's funny. I work for 350.org. And I love our organization. I'm very loyal to the mission. But it's ironic, actually. Before I worked for 350, I was one of their biggest antagonizers and critics. Because being an organizer or campaigner in the climate movement and trying to message on the climate message, especially the science of it, is really challenging. When you're talking about parts per million concentrations of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere, carbon cycling capacity, and the thermal dynamics, and just it's tough, right? And one of the things I would always tell my friends at 350 before I worked here was that you're not going to get people out on the street talking about 350. The way that people get activated is when they hear stories of struggle and people on the front line, and who are fighting to protect their way of life, who are fighting to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth and their children's future, and fighting to honor their ancestors' legacy of what they went through so that we could be here doing this right now. That's what activates people. And so storytelling is a very profound part of human history, of our shared history. And in Indigenous society, it's a fundamental piece of who we are. As a Cree person, the art of oration, of storytelling, is very profound and sacred because, especially in the language, because, my grandfather, he broke down the word nipan, like water, in our language. And we sat there for 7 hours on the stream way up in Dene territory. And the story went from the stream all the way to the stars. And that was just one word in the language, the teachings and the history and the traditional knowledge in that one word. He talked about it for 7 hours. And those 7 hours went by like that. And so when you look at the whole language and what exists in there about, as far as original instructions and how to, be a steward and take care of that sacred circle of life, or the biosphere, the place where Creator put us, it's very important. And the way to convey that, of course, is through the songs, and through the stories, and and everything lives within that. So.
Yeah, I think what Clay just said was really, really beautiful. What I would just add to that is that I think there's the traditional narrative of why humanity is collectively failing to meet the climate crisis usually has to do with politics, economics, and technology, right? For various reasons, the politicians and the leading largest economies in the world, are unwilling to transition to clean energy. And that's sort of the core of the narrative. And what I really, truly have come to believe is that there's also a poverty of imagination and narrative about, the potential for humanity to take on these crises that are existing narratives, that narrative that focuses on, political, economic, technological problems, is not rising to meet. It's not inspiring enough to enough people that we're rising to that challenge. And so I think that part of what I see my role as is like looking elsewhere, particularly to my own people and to other Indigenous peoples, for the kinds of stories and narrative traditions that might be able to rise to that kind of a challenge. And part of what that has actually now forced me to partially confront, right, is like, because I've done writing, I've done audio journalism, I'm now doing documentary filmmaking, is to like wonder if there's not also something in our own narrative traditions, or perhaps our oral history traditions, oral storytelling traditions, that is as a medium actually better fit in some ways to get at the truths and stories that we need to be telling. And so that's something that I'm still personally grappling with. And yeah, I mean, I think that piece of it, like that the poverty of narrative and imagination being like a core part of the climate crisis as well is one that I really think is important for us to grapple with.
Yeah, thank you. And to nativize it, the panel needs to be at least 5 hours long if we're really going to indigenize it. But we just have 3 minutes left here. And I just want to thank you so much for being so forthright and joining us. It's November. It's the craziest month of the year for all of us. We know that. And just making time for Bioneers. And I want to close us out by asking you each to share, and we will abruptly end in 3 minutes, to share what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self or a young Native person who wants to get more involved with the things, fighting the things that we care about, for the things we care about.
I would just say that Standing Rock, I think, taught us all that we don't need non-Native communicators to tell our stories to the world. The world wants to hear what we have to say as Indigenous peoples. And, Standing Rock really showed us that. We blew the corporate media out of the water, and our content dominated the global narrative in that moment in time. And we're going to continue to see that. So don't feel like you need, Native translators or intermediaries for you to get your story out to the world. And, and you're going to face a lot of criticism, even most intensely probably from your own people. But just persevere, and have a good smudge when that happens, and just keep going. Believe in yourself.
Yeah, I think that subject is the one that I have personally was probably one of the biggest concerns and barriers that I had. The reality is that like activism, social movements, there's, in what you do in that space, there's confrontation, right? And the unfortunate and sometimes scary reality, especially when you're a young person going into that kind of work, is that the confrontation is not always, us against the corporations and the governments, but sometimes the confrontation is, among our own people, among our own communities, among even sometimes our own families. And, one of the things that I hope has come through in this conversation between me and Clay is that like, that may be the case. There might be instances where we are unfortunately doing what some people call lateral violence or oppression. But there's also, I think, a lot of love and support out there. And, I am really grateful to people like Clay for being, the kind of loving and supporting community that you need to be in this fight. And so, you might see the stuff that happens on social media occasionally. It might be scary, but just remember that there are like also lots of really wonderful people who are in this, who you can learn from and, grow to be close to, which has been one of the greatest things that I've gotten to be part of in my young life. So.
Well, thank you very much. And just to close us out, we also want to thank those of you who are joining us at the Bioneers Conference. The fact that you are here means you care, and that really means a lot, and it supports all of us a lot. So thank you all. I hope you all go and have a beautiful rest of your afternoon, and that we'll see you back for an interactive this afternoon or for tomorrow's conference. So again, thank you. Can't wait to see you in person again.
Absolutely.